Thin. The slithering sinew that was Snake Creek Road hissed a gravelly tune beneath the tires of the '56 Ford pickup as it cruised ever closer to the saddle on the ridgeline known as Reynard Notch. The view through the rear window was obscured from time to time by the wild-eyed, scraggly-bearded flamehead Lars, whose tongue seemed to flap incredibly in the slipstream the truck churned. A mongrel of a man, given to exasperatingly elaborate descriptions of places he'd been and people he had met, he was the watchman for the woman behind the wheel of our hurtling carriage. Deanna was how she responded when the officer asked her name. That's D-Anna, darlin', with an apostrophe. Deanna Jones. What's yours? Officer Otis Brown, with his nameplate prominent just above his badge, pointed pointedly at Same and continued writing the citation for misdemeanor possession. The ticket was the subject of some dispute, as there was no actual retrievable evidence available by the time the deputy arrived. Deanna giggled and flashed a warm, inviting smile in his direction. "Why, Officer Obie, it's a pleasure to meet you. How's Harry doing?" Otis's eyes began an involuntary roll. Now the name struck home. The county chair for neighboring Burr County. She knew the chief, and he knew, as surely as that realization struck, that he would be striking the citation and trying to retreat as gracefully as possible. They did things their own way in Burr County, and without any physical evidence, the pursuit of this woman was doomed. Deputy Brown was a rookie, but he had a keen, career-preserving understanding of how to deal with local phenomenon and not become chum for the area's big fish. He chided himself for not being more conscious of the sharp blue steel that gilded the eyes of this woman. It was as distinct a calling card as his uniform. He had allowed himself to be taken in by the raucous environment of the tavern, the heated accusations of the barkeep, and the cacophonous patrons. And not least the sly siren he now knew could make his professional life a living hell if she so chose. The truck clattered along a washboard where Snake Creek adventured a shorter course from time to time. Ahead was the unknown territory I had voluntarily stumbled upon as the warm allure of a gentle September evening whispered in my wandering ear, from chance to happenstance, and now the places in between. A night, a bar, a woman, and the feverishly talkative Lars. He had been waiting at the truck when Deanna and I arrived, after the tumultuous events at the captain's dive, a struck match, a smoldering glance, a little sleight of hand, a rescue, an invitation. A confluence of events and desire, and now a ride with a shared destination. I stared again at the febrile Lars and his flapping long tongue. He had been talking to the night air when we came upon him. He was riffing on some see Dick, see Jane, run spot, run vamp. April didn't believe me. April doesn't believe anything. But it's true. The ball did bounce into Herman's pin, and he scarfed it right down. Ha ha! And April, she looked and looked. She looked everywhere. Ha ha! And April. And she had to believe me. She had to. She got so mad her whole face went red except for her nose, her eyes all scrunched up and her nose so white Herman must have thought she was a big old jelly donut. He snapped her right down in one gulp. He gave a thunderous clap of his hand on the truck bed and grinned mischievously. One big old gulp, right down the gullet. Lars, settle down. Lars! Deanna was forceful and strict, but there was an undertone of warmth that belied a close and long understood bond. The fiery-headed Lars was calmer at once, though he continued in a slightly quieter tone. Well, I knew right away Mom would be mad, so I grabbed the grate off the hibachi and rapped Herman in the snout. Deanna shot Lars a sharp look. He averted his eyes and went on. Herman and me are friends. We're friends, he emphasized. So he just up and laughed, opened his big old smackers wide and laughed. That's when I saw April. She was cussing something fierce. It was almost like Herman was talking. But it was April all right. I could see her and her ball all the way back down Herman's throat. Lars looked straight at Deanna. She had a slightly bemused curl starting at the edges of her mouth. She nodded her head. So real fast I stuck the grate in Herman's mouth and shouted for April to come out. She shouts back that she's stuck on something. Here Deanna's eyebrows started a sharp arch. Stuck on something, and she wants me to pull her out. Nuh-uh, not me. Herman's got that look like Uncle Harry gets around dessert. There was an acid edge to Deanna's tone as she said, All right, Lars. Enough. Wrap it up. Time to be going. Then a lurid Lars glared, actually and truly glared at her. He finished with a flurry. So, I think maybe if I hop up and down on Herman, maybe April will squirt out. I sure hope so, 'cause Mom will be really pissed. He beat the truck bed with another tremendous thump. I looked over at her. She was steely and intent. I snorted a suppressed laugh that got her attention. She turned to me smiling. He ladles large lard, that one. A real alliterative wildcatter. Then she pushed the volume on the radio to an almost painful level as we careened down the highway. The turnoff for Reynard Notch was a blind entry on a hairpin curve. Deanna swung wide into the oncoming traffic lane and double-clutched the Ford into a lower gear. She nosed the bucking sled of a truck up the shifty gravel and switchbacks with stones showering staccato bursts on the undercarriage. As we neared the top, a house with a large outbuilding came into view. Lars was out and running to the outbuilding before the truck had completely stopped. He raced up an exterior stairway to a large porch that looked out over a vast field and a distant tree line away from the main house. I noticed an equally impressive structure on the main house. It looked down over the receding valley we had just traveled. In the distance was a ridgeline with the low wattage of the town creeping ever so slightly into the evening sky. To the west, the almost translucent new moon was just visible in the waning earth glow. He's scanning for coyotes, Deanna explained. He's good about that. Are they a problem? I asked in a desultory manner. Only for the innocent, she replied cryptically. You can bunk with Lars. We'll discuss our arrangements in the morning. She turned and strode to the main house, her pace casual and alluring. I stared and contemplated following her. Not tonight. The suddenly laconic Lars cast this slender pearl from his perch above. I turned and saw a less desperate character. Lars was somehow smoother, sleeker, his hair and beard less fringed, his demeanor less erratic. He had become more ordinary, calmer. Come on up. I've got some single malt we can sample. We sat and watched the western sky settle its battle with the waning day. We sipped. We waited for scraps of conversation. We waited the stretches of silence between. We sipped. Soon our thoughts were swimming in the lush swamp of inebriated wisdom. The main house was dark, but for fireflies of light here and there. Small, isolated candles. They flicked and flittered on the surfaces of the windows and walls. Music drifted awash in the evening breeze, indecipherable, except for an occasional melodic line chased by schools of notes, and the scent of something slight and sweet strung a beguiling thread in the night air. Yes, you'll be the brave one now, won't you? The languid Lars slurred beside me. You want to chase that bird? Let me tell you about the last suitor, Frosch. That was a brave one. He was a mate. We were out casting in deep waters years ago. The day was bright, the waters roiling. I'd look to the horizon and it would dissolve into the glare of the sky. There was nothing steady, nothing to get a bearing, so I'd look into the orb of the sun. The splash was incredible. If it hadn't been for the sun temporarily cauterizing my retinas, I might have seen firsthand what had breached and leapt whole into our hold. It was a wholly oral experience as Frosch came yowling from the belly of the Saint Marabella in full agony. His arms were missing from below the elbows. As my field of vision reawakened, the grisly sight of his yet pulsing stumps, raw and sharp white with bone, alarmed and nauseated me. With little thought for my own safety, I leapt forward to see what had brought him so abruptly from the hold. There, in the shadows, glowing magnificently, lay the most spellbinding work of Piscean mastery I had ever laid my eyes upon. Frosch's cacophony of rage and pain continued unabated. It was then I spied his inanimate hands still clutching the ice shovel he had only moments before maneuvered in such dexterous fashion. Those now dripping and grim appendages would perform no more. And that unearthly and gloriously colored fish shone still and glistening, its deep pool of an eye coolly surveying my astounded gaze. And then, the speaking of words, intelligible, and I swear comprehensible communication, sublime and recognizable, stating in the clearest possible manner its soul-felt apology for this incredible sequence of events that had wrought such damage and gape-mouth horror. Suddenly, here was Frosch, still raucous with indignation and fevered agony, dashing headlong back into the hold as this magnificent denizen of the deep writhed across the scattering ice and with a quick gulp swallowed the shovel with Frosch's still stiffly clinging hands. The consequent bellow of outrage was spellbinding and enthralling as Frosch, in a fit of unconscious fury, thrust his stumps into the mouth of this technicolor beast. The ensuing melee swept them out and on to the deck, thrashing, hurtling, and spinning in a stupendous frenzy, with both splashing over the side as the waters cascaded across the bow. Then a sudden vast stillness. Moments later, Frosch burst to the surface, a huge grin creasing his previously furious visage, and miraculously, where once had been the ugly remnants of disaster, there now appeared a full, smooth, strong flesh and hands. Frosch bounded back aboard, reveling in his adventure. I stared back in silent, slack-jawed amazement. Since that day, Frosch has demonstrated a remarkable aptitude as a concert pianist. For me, the world has become a much brighter place since I have stopped staring into the eye of the sun. Lars looked straight at me and down the remainder of his drink. Without averting his gaze, he reached for the bottle and replenished the distilled pond on which we were both floating. I stared back. I took another draught on my glass and stared some more. Where is he now? On tour. How long? Years. Years. He won't be back. Why? That is for her to say. He swung his chin in an arc towards the main house. Why don't you go ask her? I snorted. But I got to my feet. There was a streak of light across the heavens. We both saw it. The lyrical Lars smirked and gestured. Follow the tail. Follow the tail. I stumbled down the steps, stopped at the edge of the path to the big house, took several deep breaths, tried to clear my fevered head, tried to steady my erratic steps. The path was luminous with small flecks of some strange glowing creatures. I leaned for a closer look and they went dim, disappearing into the murk of the earth. I took another deep breath and climbed the steps to the porch on the main house. The music was stronger, clearer, compelling. As I got closer, there were other sounds, a low, almost inaudible at first growl. It swelled with a steady menace, stopping just short of bark. and that allowed my besotted senses to realize the distinctive sound of a shotgun being chambered.